It's been a long, hard stretch for the last 3 months. We've got a few members, but before I start the meeting, obviously this is the first time we're having this virtual meeting of this board. So please bear with us. If you want to talk, just raise your hands. I don't think this facility has got a little virtual hand. I don't think it has. But if you do want to talk, just wave at me, or there's a chat facility as well. And we'll try and use the chat facility as much as we can. But if you have got something to say, let me know, and then I'll bring you in. If I miss you, just James or Ben, if you can just remind me, and I'll make sure I'll bring you in. So without further ado, let's get into the main agenda. Item 1, apologies for absence. Any apologies, Ben?
Yes, I've received apologies from Councillor Alex Rosshaw, Kate Hainsworth, Professor Lewis Town Andrews, and Rob Webster.
Right, okay, thank you very much. Any declarations of pecuniary interest? If you have any, let us know. Hi, Jackie. Yes, I can see you waving. You're on mute, Jackie. You're still on mute, I think.
I'm now. I was just pointing out that Councillor Alex Rosshaw is actually here at the meeting.
Yeah, I sort of saw his name flash up and it disappeared again. Yeah, he's there, but he's not actually on video. But Alex is there. He's waving and he's clapping, I think.
Sorry, hello. My diary shuffled round a bit, so I'm in now, but then I'll probably have to leave early, but hopefully not for a public element. So thank you, Chair.
Right. Okay, thanks, Jackie, for that. Sorry, Alex. Anybody else? Oh, sorry, I was going on to apologies for absence and then declaration of interest. If you have any interest, you haven't declared and you remember to declare them later on, please let us know. It won't be too late. Item 3, possible exclusion of the press and public. Now we've got 2 parts, haven't we? We've got one part with the public part, and then we've got a private part, which is basically private session part. Does that make sense? So we will go into that later on. I think it's a bit of a workshop. Item 4, minutes of meeting. Are they all okay from the last meeting? So just show hands and then we'll move on. Yeah, silence. Right, I can't see any hands. We also had a workshop on the 14th of February. The minutes will highlight that, but I think the key thing for me really was the amazing work that's been taking place at Gipton Fire Station, Leeds Community Foundation Trust, and with the 2 supporting organisations. And it was so inspirational seeing the hive of activity that was taking place in the fire station, and that is an exemplar within the region, and probably also nationally in terms of what communities can do when they actually get organised at a local level, with local communities actually driving that agenda forward, which is probably something that we will be talking about later on. So I won't say too many things. Before I move on, does anybody want to make any comments about any observations about the workshop that we had on the 14th of Feb? I think the meeting was very good. Item 6, just want to say a few things before we move on. Firstly, we have got 4 new board members. We've got Carl Oxford, who has got a wealth of experience. But I'm really pleased that he's actually been able to join us, because and it's probably timely, because we appointed him some time ago. But on the back of Black Lives Matters, I think it's really crucial, right here, that Carl come at an opportune and timely time, because Carl does actually have got a lot of knowledge of the African Caribbean community and also the business ventures that are taking place. And there's been a lot of research done over the weekend. I saw a piece in one of the documentaries where we need to do more for Black women to actually come into business. And also because Black women are actually probably at the bottom in terms of all the challenges we are facing. So we've got Carl, who's actually a new member. We've got Sam Keeley from Yorkshire Sports Foundation. Again, Sam has got a wealth of experience, and already she's actually bringing forward some challenging questions, right? Which is good, because we want people who actually constructively challenge, and by listening we can actually learn and move on. Also, Claire Harrison. Claire works for the Care Quality Commission, and specialism is IT and all that digital stuff. which is really, really important, and she's just waving at you. And again, you know, it's a range of skills. Clay, can I bring you in at the end, right? Yeah, you know, we've got a full agenda, and I will bring the 4 people who have joined in to say a few words. Like, yeah, that is something I've got on my radar, but only for about a minute. And we've got Kate Hainsworth. Kate is also on the main LEP board, and I mentioned the fantastic work Kate is doing with the Leeds Community Foundation Trust. And last time we went and saw the marvelous work that they're up to. Kate's actually also a valuable member because I've already been working with her on the main LEP board. And again, I really welcome her to actually come onto this panel. 23rd of March seems like a lifetime away, but the way it's actually affected every single person everywhere around the globe is unprecedented. You know, usually things happen, but they happen in isolation, but this is actually happening at the same time, and it is bringing people together. But at the same time, it's actually polarizing many communities, and we see what's happening up and down the country and also across the world. Our lifestyles have changed in such a way that we could have never imagined. And livelihoods have been affected, and I suppose the LEP's responsibility, which this is part of, its role is to actually get the livelihood back to some kind of a norm. And unfortunately, you know, lives have been lost, and my heart goes out to every single person who knows somebody, all the families out there, the thousands and across the globe who have lost a loved one on the back of this massive crisis. And on the back of that, I only picked up last week that young people in our region are going to be adversely affected. And on the Black Lives Matter, we have got big challenges, because part of the agenda for this group is to actually how to make the impact, how does inclusive growth actually make that difference. And one of the things that I was talking to Jackie and Alan and a few, James and I forgot the other guy's name, but because he's not there, is what is it we're doing, and how do we contribute in terms of that bigger piece of the LEP board? It's something that we can talk about, but one of the things we need to look in terms of what we do is, do we actually reflect and review? We've got a really good framework that we've developed across the LEP in terms of how we actually start to engage, but what is it that we're trying to do, and how is it best delivered? But we don't have a budget. We more of a, you know, pull a lever here and something might happen here. So how do we actually make sure that things happen? Because one of the things I'm fortunate to do, along with Jackie, who's my chief exec, is we have an inclusive growth commission in Kirklees. But Jackie's the chief exec and I'm the leader, and things just happen. But within the LEP structure, it's more complicated, it's more complex. We've also got big responsibilities that are taking place in terms of, you know, local authorities, you know, outbreak control board, which I don't want to talk about too much. But everything that local authorities do needs to actually also, you know, feed into the work that the LEP's doing. So there's huge challenges that are taking place. And how do we actually prepare ourselves as we move into the phase of transition to become a combined authority with the mayor? Because once the mayor comes in place, it'll be good news, and it'll be great in terms of the amount of capital and skills and the infrastructure we can start to deliver. But it will also create some challenges, because the combined authority will then become a political, democratically elected body in itself. So what we need to do is we need to actually set the pace, set the scene, set the agenda very early doors, that we don't then have to start to convince the new mayor in terms of how we fit in. And it's really exciting. So what I will do is very quickly, I'll bring Carl. Do you want to just say a few words? Carl Oxford, you're the new panel member, and it would be good if you can just say a minute. Over to you, Carl.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. To be honest, I'm talking from my phone because for some reason the Zoom link hasn't come to my computer, so I'm trying to work it out.
Don't worry, we can hear you and see you loud and clear, Carl, so don't worry about that.
Anyway, thank you, Councillor Pandor, and great to link with everyone and be part of this committee and the advisory role that we play. I think it's really exciting, and notwithstanding the very, you know, extremely difficult times we have ahead of us, but I think it's a role that, you know, humbly we can play a significant effort in restoring our communities, and thank you for having me, and I look forward to supporting and contributing to the effort.
Right, thanks, Carl. Really appreciate you coming on board. Sam, do you want to say a few words, Sam?
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Pandor. Yeah, like Carl, really pleased to be part of this and be able to contribute to something that's really close to my heart. I've been working with James and Alan and others around the Inclusive Growth Framework for a number of months. Really passionate about how physical activity and sport contributes to well-being and developing skills and increasing productivity. And Carl and Councillor Rosshaw both know, before I did this job, I spent 2 decades in Bradford supporting communities and supporting the inclusive growth agenda across communities in Bradford. So really, really pleased to be able to contribute what I can in terms of the inclusive growth agenda across the region with all you guys and who've got lots of experience too. Thank you.
Thank you. Claire, do you want to say a few words, please?
Afternoon, everyone. So I echo what Sam and Carl say, and also I've done quite a lot of work. Oh, what I was going to interrupt with earlier was that I no longer work at Care Quality Commission. I now work at Homes England.
Oh, right, okay.
I've just been there for a couple of weeks. It's really interesting, actually.
Congratulations. Well done on your appointment.
And but I'm continuing. I brought into my new organisation all the work and contacts and whatnot I've done over the last couple of years in the diversity space, if you like. So a lot across government. I did a lot around women in digital, just because that's my background. I still work with digital data and technology, and a lot with the NHS. But in the last couple of years, I've done a lot more around BME and people with disabilities. So I'm really hoping that everything I've done so far and all the sort of networks that I'm part of, we can really join up here and just share learning and networks and good ways of working, spreading the word.
Right, yeah, no, thanks a lot. And last but not least, Kate Hainsworth. Kate, are you there?
I think Kate's offered
she gave her apologies.
Oh,
yeah.
Sorry, my apologies. Sorry. Right, okay. Right, I think Kate's got a board meeting or something. But anyway, we'll catch up with her later on. Right, okay. But just before I move on, one of the things that I also wanted to think about in the next part is how we can. I'm repeating myself, but I think it's really, really important that we actually do understand what the challenge is. The challenge is so great that this board, as it is at the moment, and with the work program, and the challenges that have come through in terms of both deprivation, poverty, and more recently around Black Lives Matters, is so great that we will have to now start to rethink and restructure how this board will actually, go forward. And we can talk about that later on. But one of the things I was talking about with Jackie and Alan was, do we take a, in inverted commas, like a performance management type of role in terms of making sure that we've got that assurance and that connectivity between what's happening at a local level, how we actually check out if things are taking place, and is the agenda actually being delivering what we've set out to do. And one good thing that I think I need to share with you is the chair of the LEP, Roger Marsh, is actually completely 100% on the ball in terms of what we need to do. And he keeps on sort of like, motivating me and inspiring me to actually make sure that we do actually start to do stuff. Because those of you who know the way that LEP's organised, you have a different panels, and they have a very clear remit, and they have multi-million-pound budgets, and just go and deliver. Like skills, massive agenda; investment, massive agenda; infrastructure. So it's very, very easy for them to actually, get something and get an outcome. For us, it's more difficult, but we can talk about that later on when we move forward. Item 7, we'll move on to COVID-19 economic response and recovery. Alan, do you want to take us through this, please?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Very happy to. So the purpose of the report is to, firstly, to provide a bit of an overview about some of the known economic impacts of the pandemic, and also for us to consider within that, in particular, how it has impacted on different parts of society in different ways, some of which has been well publicised, and I'll come to that in a moment. The second thing is to bring to the panel's attention the partnership working that is happening through the West Yorkshire Economic Recovery Board, and to develop a regional plan. And this panel, following this meeting, has got an opportunity to have a more detailed discussion about the content of that. So, and for the reasons that others have already articulated, it's crucially important that the Recovery Board is really challenged to make sure that the plan that is produced is inclusive and takes into account the impacts of the pandemic on certain parts of society. So to give you a flavour of that as set out in the paper, but to draw a few things out, the number of jobless claimants has there's been an unprecedented increase in that across West Yorkshire, and some really eye-watering figures, which and it isn't flat across the whole population. You know, as you might expect, younger people have been particularly impacted, and also high levels recorded for over 50s, and there's a real concern that some of those people might not make it back into employment, and we need to think about what programs are necessary at a regional level going forward to help support those people back into employment. The other big issue which has been highlighted in particular in the media is around the disproportionate impact that the pandemic has had on Black and minority ethnic populations, where the level of infection, the level of mortality, very sadly has been higher, and we need to consider that going forward as we go into the recovery as well. There are some key questions that that the paper sets out for the panel, and so I'm looking now at 2.9, and then I'll go back a few steps. So the first is, how should we measure a successful recovery? So what does success look like? What are the things that we're actually trying to, how will we know if the interventions that we've put in place have been successful? How targeted should we make our interventions? So what we're talking about there is that there have previously been these big national interventions, which have essentially been to the most part flat across the economy. One of the advantages of having a localized approach is it gives you the opportunity to be more targeted in terms of your interventions. So question, how targeted should we be? Should we be really, really focused on those aspects of the economy and the population that need the most support? Are there any, the next question is around where should we concentrate intervention? So this isn't just about geography, but also about different sectors of the economy. And then finally, what should we spend money on? Now, it's worth us saying at this point that the level of investment that we've got available in the region to support this is small at the moment. What we will need to do is put together and ask for government, and government will know this. They are looking for us to come forward with plans and proposals. We need to go to government and say, if you give us this much, this is what we would look to do with it in order to support the region's recovery. So that's what we're looking for from the board today, is a discussion around those things. The board has already agreed that well, a few things really. One is that the underlying challenges facing the region are essentially the same as they were before the pandemic. Those challenges have not gone away. It's just that there is a different lens and a bit of a new world that we view them through. We still have a an economy which needs to be more productive. We still need much greater investment in transport and infrastructure. We have an unequal economy where not everybody gets to contribute to it and benefit from it. And we also have the challenge of becoming a zero carbon city region. Those challenges all still exist. So with that in mind, the board has agreed three key priorities. The first is a recovery that ensures that we have resilient businesses and businesses that are boosted by innovation, skills, and entrepreneurialism, which are those things which were priorities beforehand. The second thing is that we use the recovery as an opportunity to drive forward the clean growth agenda. So thinking about investment in green jobs and green infrastructure and retrofit and that kind of thing. And then the third thing is trying to ensure, as I described before, that the recovery delivers inclusive growth, good standard of living, good work and well-being in support of this broader agenda. So with that, Chair, I'll stop there and take any views from the panel. Look forward to hearing what people have to say.
Right, thank you, Alan. If you want to talk, just put your hand up or just drop me a chat saying that you want to come in. Jackie, do you want to come in?
I just want to add to Alan's feedback about the Economic Recovery Board. I think there was two things I would add to that. I think my recollection was that actually in the final three priorities that Alan described, in terms of resilience and clean growth and inclusive growth, for me, I think there was more emphasis being put on the real need for inclusivity in a way that I've not seen before in the region. So I think there's something for this panel to kind of reflect on. If ever there was a moment where the doors ajar, this is the moment, and I think it needs to be seized in that vein, recognising that there's no funding on this issue at the moment, but I just think there's a huge drive and a commitment coming from the Economic Recovery Board. I also think, added to that, then there is something for me about when tasked with how bold and brave do you want to be in this territory, the board were very, let's be ambitious in that space. So I don't want us to lose sight of that as well, because I think over the years, if you think through to the financial crash, there's been a number of times when we've had to put action plans together to look at kind of how the economy would react. And I think that certainly the expectation of the board is that we use this as an opportunity to, yes, continue on the things that have always been challenging for us as an economic region, but also to drive through the improvements in the areas that we want to see, particularly around those three areas that Alan talked about.
Thank you, Jackie. Anybody else want to come in? Put your hands up. Hi, Jane.
Thank you, Chair. I think I would echo what was said. I think my response to the presentation that both Alan and Jackie have made is that target is better rather than trying to do too much and spread across a very large span of diverse work, because let's face it, everything is connected. So targeted. I think there's also a very strong link, and Jackie's right that this needs to now be made much more explicit, between productivity and inclusive growth. And we need to make that very, very explicit in terms of skills, and as people said, in terms of the potential for a lost generation of people graduating from school or from university or college right now, in terms of our Black and ethnic minority communities, in terms of older people who are losing their jobs in their 50s. It's a little early to say precisely what the scenarios that are outlined in the paper, how they're going to shape up. But I think that link between productivity and inclusiveness needs to be made very, very strongly. And for me, targeting has got to be done, because it's just too gigantic an agenda otherwise.
Thanks, Jane. Good stuff. Anybody else want to come in? Please put your hands up. Carl, yes?
Yeah, cheers. Can I just follow on from Jane and also reference back to yourself, Councillor Pandor? And thanks, Alan. It's a very thorough and thoughtful and wide-ranging draft. I think what we can do in terms of realistic achievement of targeting is, as we are doing and as our role is to provide advice and guidance to the Economic Recovery Board, and also how this document then relates down to a local level, is be quite, and I think you said it, Jackie, where we need to be quite brave and ambitious, you know, in making clear what should be fundamental in that framework, and how we get the local levels to develop local action plans that's, you know, relevant to their local conditions and situations. What we find in the document so far is it makes reference to evidence around inequalities, BAME groups in health, but we know that evidence also exists for all the other sectors for those BAME groups as well, whether they be based on 10-year census data or you know, interim market forecasts. So I think we can make clear of what some of those evidence baselines are in terms of BAME groups in particular, around some of the things that need tangible responses to. And I think we can also make clear that those responses need to be across the different sectors, particularly around, I mean, it does reference as well, I think, it makes some reference to education, but we have training, we have enterprise, we have employment, yes, there's health, and there are housing, and you know, every aspect of this document relates to those BAME groups and the inequalities that have historically and systematically affected them. So we can set that framework now. I don't think there's any problem with us doing that now across the board. I mean, there are 5 priorities, inclusive growth being one, but I said this and it was said by other colleagues during some of those Zoom training days, that to me, inclusive growth cuts across every aspect of the LEP anyway. And so, you know, being one of the 5 is good, but I think we need to encourage all the other 4 panel remits to consider inclusive growth in everything that they do, because the data is there, the evidence is there. And I think we can get ahead of the game, and it shouldn't have to take Boris Johnson to launch an inequalities commission on race and other forms of inequalities today for us to know that we've had the evidence and the data in front of us for the last at least 3-4 decades of census data. So the information's there, but also we, you know, and I'll end with this. We also have the benefit of good practice. And I know it talks about good work and learning from good practice. Well, back in the 80s and 90s, when we had this level of social unrest and destabilization, some of the reactions that came from that were to deliver smart programs in those same inner cities and targeting many of those same BME groups. Now, those things were needed then and they are definitely needed now. So I think we can also give some encouragement to our local areas to say, well, how do you now start looking back and learning from what was done previously, and put some of those things in now, including in the short term and medium term, into, you know, so not just based on the resilience phase. And I think I read that we've got a suggested inclusive growth panel in September, where we are going to be looking at some of the interventions that are specific for our group. But I think we can look at some of those interventions even within this next 12-month period. Finally, I would like to say that one of the things that does affect our economies and investment is social unrest. And clearly, that is very high as a risk and possibility, even in our inner cities in West Yorkshire. So we make reference to other strategies and plans outside of the LEP. We talk about health and other things, but I think we also do need to look at the issue of some of the more social and crime and justice factors that can deter investment and lead to business closures.
Thank you, Carl. Excellent. Anybody else wants to come in? I'm just trying to see. Right, okay, I've got Andrew and Mike. I saw. So Andrew first, and then Mike Hawkins.
Right. Thanks for this, and it's a very interesting report and one that's been picked up in the media, given the significant increase in unemployment rates in some areas that previously had lower levels. I think what's important is to have a united voice on the representations to government on investment. I think that the amount of resource that will be needed to respond to the need to reskill a large section of the community is something that will affect us all. So I appreciate that we're, as York, we're just outside for the moment, but I think it's a message that we could work together on. And I think it's the danger is that those pockets of deprivation that existed across the area, and that includes my own ward in York, that this will exacerbate that sense of being left behind. And I think that's something that we do need to tackle and to give some hope. But returning to the issue of resources, we're still at the phase of trying to help businesses survive in order to retain jobs, because it's going to be harder to generate new jobs than to retain the ones that we've got. And there isn't enough resource at the moment for some businesses to keep them going, especially those that will not be able to reopen for some considerable time. And even when they are open, they will only be able to run at 30% capacity of customer base. So that's something that we've got to look at long term.
Okay, thank you. I'm just taking these as I'm seeing the chat, because I'm trying to focus on the chat, focus on anybody who's actually putting their hands up, and then also multitasking. I'm only a man, so I can't multitask. Anyway, I've got Mike, and then Sam, and then Peter. Mike,
thanks, Chair. Thanks, Chair. So just building slightly on the point that Carl made about the cross-cutting nature of the sort of inclusive growth agenda, I think there's just a few things that I want to highlight. The first is it's not just about the cross-cutting nature, but actually about the interlinkages between the priorities you've set out. So thinking about how, if you're investing in businesses to create jobs, how you're then ensuring that your skills and employability programs are established to actually ensure that you're training people up to access those jobs, and particularly how you're designing. It's not just about targeting schemes and ensuring that different groups of people are able to access them, but actually how you're designing schemes so that they're recognising the differential needs of different communities in different parts of the region. And I think that's the crucial bit. So it goes beyond just targeting with cash, but actually how you might need to design schemes differentially. And the other couple of things that I just want to highlight was when speaking to government and making asks, as I think they're asking you to bid for sort of shovel-ready projects at the moment. Are there additional things you could ask for around supply-side initiatives at the same time? So it's not just about infrastructure cash you're getting, but actually how can you ensure that there is some supply-side cash coming through at the same time, so that doesn't trail the infrastructure money. And secondly, I think I'm reasonably confident that we'll see some national programs coming out, particularly around young people. Possibly in the coming weeks. We know that national programs don't always work well for different local economies, and whilst I would hope that West Yorkshire and other regions would have some degree of local control over how they're designed, I think it's a pretty reasonable guess that might not be necessary. So can the Combined Authority and LAP start to think through what things it might need to attach onto national programs to make sure that it really does work for local communities?
Right, thanks. Sam, you want to come in, please?
Thanks, Councillor Pandor, and thanks, Mike. You articulated a lot of what I was going to say, so thanks for that. I support what you've said. And I suppose to just build on what you were saying, I think if you look at some of the priorities in the report of the other panels, obviously, they are they are looking towards the inclusive growth agenda in a lot of those priorities. And I suppose my question is, and maybe this is something to talk about later, but my question is, what's the role of our inclusive growth panel then to make sure that we can support those other panels in the design of their programs, to make sure that the targeting and the inclusive growth priorities are really being addressed and achieved? And I don't know whether that would be a change in the role of this panel, because obviously I'm new. Just something to think about, I think.
Yeah, no, good point. I'll come at the end, because I think you've all made some really good points. Yeah, and one thing that I don't want to do is just think about stuff and saying I can think and. But anyway, I'll come at the end. Peter.
Thanks, Chair. Sorry, my camera's not working, so I'll just use the audio if that's okay. I think Mike's point is really good. I think there isn't clarity around the resource that the Combined Authority and West Yorkshire Leeds City region has at the moment from government. But the more we can try and influence those national programmes to reflect place and our localities, I think is absolutely critical. And I think in the broader document that was shared around ahead of the private workshop, I do like the focus on the kind of short term, medium term, long term aspects. I think that's absolutely critical. I think we just need to probably think through the relationship between the different timelines, whether one sets a good basis for another. I know certainly in the short term, though, there are going to be some huge challenges, we know, labour market challenges that Alan spoke about, which are absolutely critical. I think we just need to think through as a panel that each of those stages provides a platform in order to move us into the next sort of stage and how we do that. But yeah, it's an excellent start by the Combined Authority and partners. Thanks.
Okay, is anybody else who wants to chip in? Bear in mind, we've got a workshop which will probably be actually just taking on the conversation that we've just had. I'm just quickly going through. I can't see anybody else putting their hands up. Just a few observations. I think you're absolutely right that we need to actually shift thinking around this. But one thing I don't want to do is think too much. And it's interesting, and again, this is just something that I've been talking to with Jackie about, that, you know, we are the LEP. So you are the LEP. I'm here who will take on board what you are saying towards the LEP and to the Combined Authority, with a view to not just thinking and talking about it, but with a view to doing. And this is what I was talking about, that, you know, we need to actually review and re-engage and refresh what we're doing, and we can talk about that later on. But just one of a few points. To me, this is not just about productivity anymore. Productivity is important, but as we go out into recovery, that productivity can only take place if people's well-being and if people's social infrastructure is all intact. And let me give you a really, really good example, which is a living example. And the councillors will probably get this because they've been the cold face of what's been happening. But I'm assuming that you will all know individual organisations the same thing as well, and hopefully it'll resonate with you. As we've seen businesses decline on the back of the coronavirus, as we've seen industry shut, and you know, everything that we've taken has been normal shut in terms of the economy, the voluntary and community sector has actually stepped in, and you've seen the wonderful work that they've done. You know, you'd never imagine the VCS stepping up in harm's way, and stepping up in such a way where I would have never dreamt of. You've also seen the faith sector stepping in, because the churches, the mosques, the synagogues, and the temples, they have actually managed to communicate with their community in such a way that we would have never dreamt of. I could only dream of doing what they've been doing as a local authority leader. And then, if you look at the way the NHS and local government has actually kicked in, and all the public sector organisations. I know we were all coming out for clapping for the NHS, but you know, the care sector, the way that's actually engaged, and for example, you know, the bin men, you know, refuse collecting operatives. If they suddenly stopped, can you imagine what would happen? You know, it would be complete and utter disaster on top of the disaster that we're seeing at the moment. So the way local government has actually stepped up to the mark, where guidance has been short, politics didn't come into it, and local government actually stepped in to actually make sure that they actually carried on and picked up the pieces where the government could not pick the pieces up. Not because we wanted them to. That is the right place. Local government has that local knowledge and local influence where they can make differences. And then on top of that, we were only being able to do that with the work that we do with our voluntary sector and the community sector and the faith sector. So any recovery has got to go in hand in glove with the well-being, the faith sector and the community sectors. And this is a debate that LGA is having, that if local authorities and the combined authorities are able to make that big difference in terms of getting us back to some kind of a norm, we cannot go into a situation where we go backwards. We cannot go into a situation where we go back into austerity. If you could do that, you're not going to address anything. We can't go back in terms of the issues that have come out of Public Health England report in terms of BME are 4 times more likely to die. And more recently, the massive issue that we're facing in terms of Black Lives Matter. And it's not about Asian, it's not about any other BME community, it's about Black people. So I could be I could be a Black person, middle class, but if I walk down the road, I'd be more likely to be arrested. So we can't have that in a society. Yeah, so there's some big challenges that we're facing. It's very easy for me to actually sort of, say, well, this, that, and t'other. But we have to now really all step up, and that's where I'm hoping that we can actually open the debate up as we move forward to the next agenda item. Is we're not going to be able to do hardly anything in terms of the big priorities. We're not, and I've come to terms with that. Yeah, but what we can do is not take the role of scrutiny, because scrutiny is a different role. But how do we support the LEP in terms of the skills agenda? How do we support the LEP in terms of the investment agenda? How do we support the LEP in terms of the business and stuff they're doing? How do we support the LEP in terms of the transport stuff they're doing? Yeah, and how do we support the LEP in terms of the climate agenda? And that's where we make that big difference. So what we could actually do is develop local champions from this board. And I don't want to come back in a year's time to say that, well, let's think about how we can influence. We are part of that LEP, and this is an opportunity on the back of everything that's happened that we actually quickly refresh, and that takes us nicely into the next agenda item, which is, let me get my papers. Well, actually, we finished the formal part of the meeting, so what we'll do is we'll now go into the next part, which is private